then you'll launch your own token that people can invest in, sort of like they're investing almost in your crypto exchange. And so that was actually one of the ways that FTX, you do not get to that level and not know that things were wrong.
Well, reading her tweets about amphetamine use was pretty wild, too. The whole scene was wild.
Want to store your money somewhere else. How do you store it? So there's this idea of like these alternative currencies that are kind of interesting. And then there's some arguments that like, hey, if you're someone like me.
One guy who lost a hard drive and who's paying people to go through a landfill to try to find his hard drive because there's billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin on that hard drive.
Yeah, people lose their to that token, then you sell it off, and then the price plummets. So you thought you had a bunch of money, but actually it's worth nothing. Like there's all these new scams that have emerged as a result of people getting interested in this idea of an alternative.
Whiz kid, who you listen to him talk, he has an answer for everything. He's so articulate, he's so knowledgeable. Like I listened to previous interviews before he got busted.
That's what ultimately matters is how much do you have on deposits that you owe out. And so with Binance, we don't really know. The only one we have a little bit more of a look into is I start hearing about these tokens. And they're like, hey, selling courses, like it's always the new grift. You always have to find, because people figure it out. Like they go like, oh, that actually doesn't work. Like, hey, drop shipping is, he cleaned up on all his own customers. Just basically taking their money. Like, oh, I know exactly when to fold. I know exactly when to bet. So he had God mode enabled, and then somebody found out about this God mode. And so the lawyer's like, how do we basically cover this up? Dan Friedberg's like, how do we, what do you want me to do? And he's like, that's the issue was FTX's problem was not CZ. Ultimately, he's kind of the guy who like pushed over the House made, caught. In my view, what he did was criminal. That's why I started. But it hasn't been prosecuted or anything like that. But he's on a leaked private call. Everyone can go listen to it yourself. It's just this what they wanted to store some Bitcoin with Tom Brady. They wanted to be alongside Tom Brady. So he's like, there was fungibility between wallets. You put $100,000 into this little mixer, and then it sends $100,000 out later, and nobody knows where that money came from.
What is a mixer? How does it work?
It's interesting. So the most famous example is Tornado Cash. In the terms of service, they said results may vary. What's that about? I mean, ultimately, it's like, and so I realized like, there's this sophisticated way that they're preying on my psychology and the regulation for, I guess, offshore crypto exchanges, right?
And so these campaign finance, these violations.
Very strange. And these offshore entities were also using like U.S. branches. Like there's FTX US, which was like more regulated, but not really that regulated. It's, I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world, and that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness. There were things that were coming out like questions about, okay, they say they have all this money. Where on chain is it? So like the blockchain, everything's publicly, you can see it. At the end, when you're like ready for this thing to go down, because I know as soon as I get on, it's going to end pretty quickly after. I said, let me ask him some real hard questions. Because all these guys are like, Sam, what is the experience of the lawyer that FTX then hires is like being complicit on a leaked private call, trying to cover up this God mode scam.
It was like 70,000 or something like
60 plus, yeah.
So that's the lure. The lure is you buy in for pennies, and one day you're insanely rich. I'm sure you know about that. Easier or more profitable for him. Mm-hmm. Like, why would he do that?
I'm not as familiar with the regulation side of things. People were talking about that a lot. Guy who enabled God, or who helped cover up God mode. And he's like, well, I don't want to comment on other, people, or it's just like.
Well, how does he skate on that? Like, why the celebrities are important. And that's why.
It's a huge part of it.
The connection to BlackRock is important.
Huge part. Yes. Because they're the legitimacy that says, hey, I'm, So before, it's like if I send you $1 and then you send that dollar on, we can easily trace that back to me, right? It's like here. But if I send $1 to you and everyone's sending you $1, and then you're sending $1 to all. Fight, like one of the best ways to fight crime is at their wallets, like take away their banking. And crypto has just really revitalized that because he'd be afraid of being indicted, or I don't really understand why he can't go, but he can't go to America. So Sam was meeting with regulators. CZ felt cut out, like he was basically going to get a bad deal. And it just was kind of, I was just trying to find my way. I was just trying to like, even before that, I had done a show where I was like trying to break down these topics. I was like, no, they're like, hey, don't work a 9-to-5 job. Like, be free like me. And I'm like, you're here on a Sunday at like 5 p.m. How free are you really? Like, you're just like, that is his background. And so I asked, Sam, I was like, what does it say if this is your chief regulatory officer? This guy, he thinks he can reestablish control because he's so smart. He is such a good liar that he's like, I can just lie my way out of it. So I think that's why he ultimately talked. His idea was, if I reputable people like BlackRock, Sequoia Capital, they all invest in this guy. Kevin O'Leary famously promoted it for like $18 million.
They gave him $18 million to promote it?
He says, right, the inflation rate, I think, is like 75%. Or something like that. It's an unimaginable, it's just out of control inflation. And if you hold on to your Turkish lira, you're in for a bad time. A lot of people found out about crypto the same time the mainstream media, everyone else did. So by the time they're actually investing,
it's too late.
It's too late. I think the like most fair case you could make about gay. So like, can you do this?
So someone had to be gay to do it? Like.
No, basically they were like, we need someone trustworthy we can trust to do this. So, hey, you're going to be the guy. Like, what I know is everyone's always interested in pulling up the ladder after them and, like, building the kind of the rule book around, like, hey, like, if you're from this certain jurisdiction that we're a part of, you're fine. If you're not.
Like, views about what? Like, you didn't start doing this. You started doing just, like, a normal interview show?
I was just doing a normal interview show with a few of my buddies. There were some margin trading accounts. And I'm like, no, but there were people who didn't trade with margin. There were people who just put their money with you. And they wanted what he said in one of the interviews. He goes, no one believes me when I said I donated dark because no one believes anyone would be like, everyone wants the credit for donating. No one believes that I just do it on the sly. Might be one of the first like trillionaires or whatever, like he's such a great entrepreneur. They think he's such a genius. It might have been one of the A1Z guys, or is buying both, lying about it so that you can get all the good press of like caring about all these social issues while also not caring at all. Really perpetuated their fraud. I can break it down. How much do you know about the FTX
Let's
situation?
break it down for people that don't know about it. So
let's do it. So okay. FTX was this crypto exchange something. Because I was just like, why does this make some people tens of millions of dollars and nothing happens? Why are...
Jamie's looking it up.
I thought I knew it off the top of my head, and now I don't want to say the wrong one. A16Z.
A16.
Involved in what you do.
It's a weird thing.
So when did you start your YouTube channel?
So I started it a few years ago, 2018, 2019. Very treatable kind of cancer, and she's fine. But at the time I watched her as she's like, gets this diagnosis, gets swept up with all these hucksters who are telling her that the way to treat thyroid cancer, lateral like dollars or like some asset, will give you FTT tokens, which is their own invented coin. And that should have value if anything goes wrong. And people were accepting that as value. Annoying. So like
that.
The famous example is like Coinbase is in America, and they have to file all these forms. They're a regulated entity. They're publicly traded.
And in the FTX case, how much of it was getting celebrities to endorse the platform?
It's huge. This is what I wanted to say. Like, the more I study, not actually like this incredible business that you thought it was, that you're going to get rich easily. So don't do that. Go do crypto. You got to get into crypto now. And then it became the money system has to be safe. Like, your grandma has to be able to charge back her credit card when there's a fraudster, right? Like, or this whole thing doesn't work. You can't rely on people being technically savvy in order to...
Did you interview him before the scandal?
No, not before the scandal.
So it's like as it was going down.
As it was going down, he goes on all these Twitter spaces. He doesn't want to... He's doing interviews with that, just kind of grifting here. And so, but you'd see him in nice cars, and so I was like, what am I looking at? And then as I'm doing my YouTube show, I'm like, I get fed a bunch, which thankfully she did, and she's fine now. She takes medication to replace the hormones her thyroid would generate. But I saw my mom kind of get swept in this thing that I knew was nonsense. But
go back to making money again.
I don't think he thought he would repay everyone, but everyone thought like, oh, we'll just enter Chapter 11 bankruptcy. We'll restructure the company. We'll reopen. We'll just turn all the debt into new.
Analogy for losing your house.
You know what's funny? Yeah.
You know, I mean, good Lord.
The idea of these mixers was you'd anonymize your transactions. So, like, let's say he blamed all the wrongdoing of FTX on Alameda Research. And he said, I don't control Alameda Research. Even though he was the owner, he's no longer...
Regulators, when he was trying to impose regulations or encourage regulations, how could that have benefited him as opposed to Binance? Like, what could they have possibly done to make it easy?
Because every day it's getting less valuable. So the question is, what do you do if you're in that country making money? If you default on that loan, I'm out $1 million. Another way is I ask for, okay, I'll take some equity in the studio if something goes wrong, right? So I cover my butt if you default on it. Now, sort of, this is a fraud because, you know, no one knew. There's a bunch of backing. So I made a video at the time being like, this crypto CEO just describes a Ponzi scheme. So they were paying everybody to promote this FTX crypto exchange. And the idea is this is the next big thing, right? And this is where you're going to make money, $10 million, or your data's lost forever. And you're like, call the police, and you go, hey, track this guy. And they're like, to what? To a Bitcoin wallet? Was going to undo sort of everything. Like if you don't root out the scams, you don't find ways to solve that, this is never going to work. Because if you're great, I used to be just like you, Joe, but then, you know, I found out that doing Amazon drop shipping is the way to make millions of dollars. And, you know, I used to fail, but by these little tricks, I hadn't really found my footing. But throughout my entire life, I had kind of had this relationship with like hucksters and fraud where, you know, when I was in high school, my mom got thyroid cancer. Smart thing, which is something like this happens, you shut up. You don't say anything.
Right.
And then you point at your boss. I mean, that's basically what they did.
Oof.
Which they for sure did stuff wrong too. So he decides to donate dark to a Republican, like to Republicans. And part of the accusation is he knowingly did this through one of his reasons that our banks have a bunch of anti-money laundering laws. There's a reason that they have all sorts of finance laws. It's not for their safety. It's for your safety. I mean, it's like they need to A1Z, A16Z. It was one of those, Sequoia or A16Z. One of them wrote this glowing review of Sam, basically saying he's going to be one of the first trillionaires. But ultimately, the outcome of that is like, yeah, I encrypt all your data. Joe, send me. I know you're this successful podcaster. I want you to send me.
It wasn't a scam. I've said this before because I root for nerds to like be that successful that you just completely living outside the norms of society, just fucking.
Hey, just make this problem go away. This is the CEO. Like, go blame it on somebody else. Go blame it on some like, you know, third party that got access to our website. Say it was like a glitch or something. And so that
Binance hasn't had similar problems.
No, they've had a few runs and they've covered withdrawals. I mean, so it's just the problem is a lot of it's a black box. Tom Brady backs him. Well, Tom Brady's got to have some guys who are looking into this. And then it's like, well, BlackRock backed him. Well, BlackRock definitely has some guys who looked into it.
Right.
It's Sequoia Capital. They said he was and ultimately one of the ways, like even some of the candidates they donated to were through like a third employee we didn't even know about. And they were like donating through him for like all these, like they tracked his account. He's playing League while on calls about the failure of FTX.
Wow.
Just imagine the arrogance.
Is that arrogance?
For some of these people making hundreds of millions of dollars, people are miserable at the end of it, and nothing happens. And that was the start of my show.
So you start just doing interviews
with regulators. They were all Sam was working really closely with regulators to try to get regulations passed. And CZ felt like he was cut out. So that stirred up this like battle between them. And ultimately, eventually got paid out like $2 billion.
Whoa.
Yeah. Some of it was in this FTT token, though. So they have a bunch of FTT, right? And so it's like November was when all I used to play like a variant of League, so I know it's fun, but it's not like fun to the point. Look, this guy's whole thing was like, I'm this effective altruist, middleman, because there's no one who controls like Bitcoin. Like no one can say like no to a transaction. Now it's like there's nothing to stop you from sending that money, and then he goes into the crypto space and he launches FTX.
He's very young, right? How old is he?
I think he is young. I'm not. Maybe you can look that up, Jamie. 31. Like the house always wins, right? So when FTX was taking off, it just seemed like everyone who was someone was backing him. So then it was okay, and then I think a lot of these people deferred after the fact. He's like he's still playing video games, and you're like, can you have the decency to get off the video game and talk to people?
So bizarre. It's just so bizarre.
These exchanges where it was worth more. So he was arbitraging this difference in prices, and then after he made his money that way, they're setting it up with like, I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke, right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's like the fact that this guy, he got away with lying so long and perpetuating this image of himself as this generous billionaire. You know, he's sort of the next Warren Buffett. That when everything goes wrong, is he on Twitter? I probably butchered his name, but he was actually originally sort of an ally of Sam. So he invested in FTX early on, put $100 million in, and
I watched the new CEO, talk about it.
Yeah,
about him trying.
That's John Ray.
Yeah, trying to unravel it, and it's amazing.
They kind of shut down. Myself and some other people were saying like, we think they're insolvent because we had taken a look at their numbers. And we said, there's no way they have the money for this. They don't have the tokens. What are you saying in the terms of service that means that I can't sue you? You have all these terms of service that basically say none of what I'm saying is true. Like they say they can get you rich in the sales pitch and then to expose. But like I'm interested in the characters who perpetuate fraud because they're such interesting psychological case studies. Sam Bankman-Fried, you could probably write a whole book about Dark where it's like you can donate through super PACs, political action committees, and you can donate as much as you want, and you don't have to be, your name has to appear nowhere. And so that's actually lied my way into it. I can sort of lie my way out of it. And this is what he did. So prior to this, I'd interviewed him twice before, and I had kind of gotten hamstrung with he's just so good at dodging stuff. Everybody, I ask him, and he doesn't want to talk to me. So, but he's going on these Twitter spaces. So I was tracking when he'd go on a Twitter space, and I would contact the people ahead of time and said, hey, touch your money, obviously. That was the whole point. It's like, you deposit with us, we're not going to do anything with your money. It's your money. It's like a deposit. It's almost like a bank. Like you deposit with a bank. Your bank isn't supposed to go ahead and take your money. FTX's influence went from the Bahamas reaching into the United States while technically not really being regulated by the United States.
Yeah, they were the number 2 donor to the Democratic Party.
And why is so much of your balance sheet made up of your own tokens? It's a big question. So one of the things that FTX had done, and a lot of companies were doing at the time, if you're from this one, you're not okay. Or I might say, hey, like CZ has connections to China, like maybe that's a problem. Or CZ has connections to here, maybe that's a big deal.
Oh,
or with just put a bunch of garlic cloves in the pot. I still remember our house like reeked. She would put 60 cloves of garlic in a stew.
How does a guy like that not wind up getting indicted?
I ask myself that every day. There's so many.
Is it a matter of time, or is it
it means playing League of Legends while on investor calls? Like at the time, that was seen as this charming, genius thing.
On calls.
You could hear even actually. Okay. It's a strange time, man, to be covering crypto, because I tried to tell people for years that this scam problem, this fraud problem, make something work. If it's going to go to the public, you have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before they had not having sort of like, it's maybe not big enough. They're good people, a lot of the people going after these guys, but it's like trying to catch everyone who's speeding. Crypto is sometimes national currencies aren't a great idea and you want an alternative. So like, look at the Turkish lira.
Inevitable.
It is inevitable. So something to understand. FTX was insolvent long before it was realized that they were insolvent. Right? So that everyone loses confidence. Everyone sells their FTT tokens. No one wants to buy it. It's worth nothing.
So how did this all fall apart?
Great question. So it found out how to be successful. And if you invest with me, I'll save you time. You know, you could do it yourself, Jay. You could do it. But what? It's going to take you 5 years. Get with me, and I'm going to shortcut your on sticks or something. Like, it was never – the problem was the foundation was wrong from the beginning. If you don't have enough deposits to cover withdrawals, you just don't have the money, right? I start covering it, and then I start to get cease and desist letters. They don't like that. So they start to send me – they say, hey, you better shut up or we're going to sue you. And I was like, okay. I'm not going to stop making these videos. I just money to a politician on my behalf. You're a straw donor. You're not really a donor. So Alameda was using customer funds to pay off politicians in order to try to get favorable. We're ultimately going to find out what we're doing here.
How many more of these are out there in the world?
As big as FTX, this stuff, and you start to have repeat occurrences. Like, I just cover stuff all the time, and you see echoes of the same thing. I just had somebody just a couple of days ago I was interviewing for this news scheme we're looking at, and he said, you know, everything, I don't have access to the book. Like, I basically knew nothing. So anytime you'd call him out on an issue, you'd say, where's the money? He goes, well, I don't know. It's gone. It's Alameda Research. Ask Alameda. Like investment funds. They invested in a bunch of NFT projects. Mark Andreessen, I think, is the guy who runs it. Sam goes, oh, you won, like, our battle. And people were like, you know, is it a battle when you lose billions of dollars of customer? The problem is when the exact moment FTX can't pay you back is the exact moment that FTT becomes worthless. So you think you have all this collateral. Coinbase, it seems like there are, you know, legitimate, but so much of the problem with crypto is we don't know how much of this stuff is money laundering. We don't know how much of this stuff is like 5 minutes or 3 minutes. So I don't want to give off the idea that, like, there's nothing here. But the problem is that with these guys, basically, a lot of these people backed Sam with the highest endorsements. And so if you're just an average person, you're thinking, well, how much more due diligence can I do than all these other guys? Or system to where they could see you, Joe, deposit a Bitcoin on FTX. They could grab that Bitcoin and start trading with it immediately.
Wow.
Even though they were never supposed to be able to. And that video has aged so well because it's like people are like, oh, it was all true. But people were outright calling it a fraud. Like Mark Cohodes, he's a famous short seller. He was
party.
That's right. But
also to the Republicans.
This is what's wild. So
yeah,
Sam knew publicly in our current American climate, like I'm blanking on the name right now. But
A1Z? What is that?
No. I'm sorry. I'm blanking on. It's this famous. I'm going to remember it right after I get out of here. It's one of the famous. And so now it's trying to be sorted out by the guy who literally unraveled Enron. And he says, this lawyer goes, it's worse than Enron. I hate doctors so much, and it always seems to like end up with a sales pitch. Like it never was like, hey, let me just give you this free thing. It was like always like there's a catch. Mm-hmm. So I didn't, right? It's all at some address. And so people were asking, like, you say you have all this Bitcoin, where's the Bitcoin? You say you have all this Ethereum, where's the Ethereum? And she would drink it up because she thought that would make her better. Ultimately, my dad convinced her, like, you got to get the surgery. Like, this ain't going to fly. You have to, ultimately get the surgery.
Down. Because it seems like they received additional scrutiny, right? Because now people are starting to look at it, and I saw that their value went down considerably.
And, like, one of the first things the guy does is he controls it, but he renounces ownership. He goes, oh, I'm passing it off to some sham director. And he goes, I don't have anything to do. I don't know. All the crypto people were trying to control regulations to favor their individual business situation. And so CZ felt like he was being cut out in Washington. And it's like, well, what's fungibility mean? It means whether you were a guy withdrawing who is this degenerate day trader, right people in charge who are going to take the fall, you resign, and then you blame it on them later when everything goes wrong. His problem, though, is Caroline Ellison flipped on him.
So she definitely flipped on him.
She was smart. Yeah. She cooperated to act that bill, and now that it was all a fraud, or the guy who basically pushed it was a fraud, now they're like trying to retool it, basically screaming about, all these scammers online. And unlike my previous work, which kind of had resonated, like it had gotten that these basically nerds in cryptography thought of, which is it's brilliant. I mean, it is brilliant because it is basically, it's almost impossible to trace, and basically like shell games where you're hiding the money.
Yeah.
You're saying, oh, invest in this. This is going to become valuable later, but you actually own a bunch around, right? Kevin O'Leary's in. So you kind of think you're swimming safely with like other savvy investors. And that's what ultimately gets you to buy in. Bernie Madoff is very similar.
Chemtrails.
Let me say this. If it's too good to be true, if they're offering market returns that you want to believe in, you go, man, I want to believe this is real. Money. Like, well, how can you view this as a battle? Like, but he viewed it as like, we're sparring partners. Like, and you won this round, or you won the war.
Because he thinks this is going to go on forever.
His whole thing was he did this thing with Ultimate Bet. So he was one of the lawyers. So there's this poker site called Ultimate Bet. And he got caught in this scandal where they had enabled this thing called, we're just going to do a few transactions through your name. That just came out in a press release. It's the new charges. He was basically like they call them straw donors, because it's like, if I give money to you to give. So I decided to start pursuing it step by step. And at first it was like just me discovering like, well, what is this? Well, how does this scheme work? Okay, so I buy this course and then what? The son of Harvard lawyers, we just sort of can't lose. And nobody paid attention to some of the red flags that were going on until ultimately it was too late. It turns out he was. It's sort of like hard. You kind of have to disprove every single, like there's always a new like health guy telling you that there's some new alternative discovery, whatever. And I was like, this is kind of weird. And I was like, why do they? I too am safe because Tom Brady's got his money there. So I just put my money
So is the lure is like how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin.
Pilfering FTX, the customer deposits, and was using it in Alameda Research, which was his trading firm, to try to make extra money, and he lost it.
And so this is all because it's on do something like that. Like, why would he publicly communicate?
This is one of the. This is why it's so interesting to me to look at fraud. Like, this is why it fascinates me, as well as I think it's an important thing. Find out, like, there were just no adults in that room, and like the few adults that there were like, they had like a criminal lawyer. Well, anyway, I don't think he's actually been convicted of anything. I shouldn't say that. They had this guy, Dan Free, broke that showed that maybe they're not as healthy as they should be. There would have been a run on the banks, and people would have found out. It's just like, when are they going to find out? He happened to be the final straw, if that makes sense.
So someone would have figured, what is it's a crypto exchange, right? So how does that work?
So the first question is, when you learn about crypto, what that was, to hide it from people who were trying to take a look at his books. But it's just, that's what I mean by black box. You never know what games these guys are playing.